So, what if I told you that the deadliest infection on the entire planet is a disease you probably think is, well, history? Today, we're going to dig into tuberculosis, an illness that has quietly shaped so much of our past and, in ways that might actually shock you, is still defining our present. Let's just start with this idea right here, because for most of us, tuberculosis feels like something from a bygone era, right? Something you'd read about in a dusty old book or see in a period drama. But as this quote suggests, the past, it has a really long reach. In our collective memory, TB, or consumption as it was called, is a ghost. It was this huge, tragic villain of the 19th century, so relentless and so widespread that people actually called it the captain of all these men of death. And this slide, it just shows the long, consistent shadow of this disease. In 1804, you have James Watt, the guy who helped literally power the modern world. And he was completely powerless to save his own son. Then, fast forward over 100 years to 1930, Stokes Goodrich dies at just 29, even though his father was a doctor. For 2 centuries, it was just the same heartbreaking story. Okay, but here's the thing. This story is not over. And this is where we need to turn from just looking at history to a really shocking and, frankly, urgent reality. 1.25 million. That is how many people died from tuberculosis in 2022. Not in the 19th century, we're talking about last year. And to put that number into perspective, that means TB killed more people than malaria, typhoid, and war combined. The scale of this loss happening right now is almost unbelievable. Yeah, after being briefly knocked off the top spot by COVID-19, tuberculosis is once again our single deadliest infection. The captain of death has basically reclaimed its throne. So why do we see it that way? Right? Why does it still feel like a disease from the past? Well, it's because for centuries we've told ourselves a very specific and deeply misleading story about it. Believe it or not, back in 18th and 19th century Europe, there was this bizarre romanticization of consumption. Lord Byron, and he was only half joking here, he just captures the feeling perfectly. The disease was somehow associated with being sensitive, with artistic genius, and this kind of tragic, poetic beauty. But that romantic image was a lie. A total lie. The famous poet John Keats also died of TB, and his autopsy report reveals the brutal, horrific reality. The disease literally consumed his body from the inside out. There is absolutely nothing romantic about that. This myth was so pervasive, it even had a name, spes phthisica, which is Latin for consumptive hope. The idea was that as the body faded away, the spirit and your creativity would just soar. It was used to explain the genius of artists from Chopin to the Bronte sisters, linking their brilliance directly to their sickness. And this whole romantic thing even extended to how people looked. As Charlotte Bronte pointed out, it was seen as a flattering malady. The physical effects, the paleness, the thinness, the rosy cheeks from a constant fever, that became the era's standard of beauty. Think about that for a second. A deadly illness was fashionable. That romantic myth, it just completely obscures the modern truth of who lives and who dies from TB today. It is no longer seen as a disease of genius. It's a disease of injustice. So today, TB is not some indiscriminate killer. Get this, 1/3 of us are walking around with the bacteria, but it only becomes active disease in the most vulnerable. It targets people with weakened immune systems, and it absolutely thrives on malnutrition and crowded living conditions. In short, tuberculosis follows the trails of inequity that we ourselves have carved into the world. And to really understand the roots of this inequity, just look at this map of Sierra Leone. The railroads, they weren't built to connect people or build up a nation, no. They were built for one reason, to extract resources, diamonds, minerals, and get them to the coast for export. This created systems of poverty and extraction that are still in place today, creating the very conditions where TB can flourish. And this is the world that Henry lives in. When the author John Green met him at a TB hospital in Sierra Leone, he was just struck by how small he was, like a young child.
But Henry wasn't a child. He was 17 years old. He's not some romantic hero from a 19th century poem. He's a teenager whose body has been absolutely ravaged by a disease that preys on the conditions created by centuries of systemic poverty and injustice.
And this brings us to the most infuriating paradox at the very heart of the TB crisis. It's a crisis that is entirely 100% solvable.
See, unlike in the 19th century when Keats and the Brontes were dying, we have had effective antibiotic treatments that can cure this disease for nearly 70 years.
So what's the problem? Well, the Ugandan physician Dr. Peter Mujanyi, he summarized it perfectly. The issue isn't science, it's access. The cure is where the disease is not, and the disease is where the cure is not. The wealth, the infrastructure, the medicine, it's all in one part of the world, while the disease just rages in another. And this leaves us with a profound and, let's be honest, a deeply uncomfortable question. The death of Gregory Watt back in 1804 was an unavoidable tragedy. The 1.25 million deaths last year, that was a choice. We know how to live in a world without tuberculosis. The real question we have to ask ourselves is, why don't we?